What's up, fellow gamers? Patch 12.12 is here with more follow-up on the durability update and the grievous wounds and healing update. So some relatively well-needed things going on. Bunch of some bug fixes. Changes to Bel'Veth as well. Overall, pretty meaningful update here. Let's get into it. What's going on? And as always, there is a TLDR at the end. Check the doobly-doo timestamp thing at the bottom, and if you don't want to watch the whole hour-long version, there's a 12-minute version ready to go for you as well. So let's start with the fact that there were indeed lots of nerfs and buffs. Bel'Veth's primarily nerfed for low elo. She is very, very low MMR skewed. Some system changes, nerfs to Predator, I think, updates to items, whatnot. Let's talk about it. All right, so first up is Amumu. And Amumu, make sure we're not zoomed properly. There we go. Much better. Amumu is getting buffed into support. They miss Amumu support being a thing, and so they would like him to at least be around. And so they're doing a bunch of buffs that are support focused. Looking at the champion overall, he gained, so this is relatively limited data, but 50 added damage to his ultimate and a substantial mana cost drop off of the Q has seemingly buffed Amumu in jungle around 2% win rate. It's actually a pretty big bump. He is now very strong for the average player. Now, he does still skew down with MMR, so he's probably not going to be great for high elo, but for the average player, he's still going to look really, really good. And support appeared to gain a lot as well. Now, support Amumu is not terribly popular. This data is somewhat suspect, but he appears to be in a pretty good spot. Amumu is totally playable for most players and good for most players in jungle and support. We have a look at the numbers real quick. The mana cost, again, down really substantially. I'm assuming maxing Q first, which somewhat subdues the buffs here. If you're jungle, you're getting this buff for like the entire game, because I believe you max Q last in the jungle, or at least you can choose to. Flat 50 damage in the ultimate, just good at all points of time. Keep in mind that Amumu is actually, I think Amumu is best played as far as a jungler, more as a damage champion than as a tank. Obviously, he has engage and whatnot, but his ratios are so generous. He's so good applying Demonic Embrace and Liandry's that you really want to consider building him as a bruiser mage and consider him more like a Rumble or, Diana, where, yeah, Diana can engage team fights, but you build her AP. Mumu, I think, is in a somewhat similar situation and recommend Demonic and things like that on him. Next up, we have Annie, and they're saying that her burst builds are not doing well after the durability update, so they're going to buff Tibbers' durability as well. One thing they are doing in this patch is updating pets to make them tankier, commensurate with how much tankier champions got. So Disintegrate is just getting a simple AP ratio buff. Tibbers is getting some health, and he's getting some armor and MR. Let's talk about those numbers here. So because the base damage is unchanged, we're taking a approximation of how much ability power that she would buy in a real game, and these are the buffs that she's getting. It's notably bringing her AP ratio to the amount of ability power required to double the damage of the ability down from under 300 to 275. So this is a very, very aggressive AP ratio on Q. As far as our durability, this is counting the health and the armor MR buffs, and a pretty decent 8 to 15% durability bump on Tibbers. Now note that champions got more than 50% more durable, so this is actually Tibbers got less buffed than Annie and co did, but that's fine. Still stronger, right? So it seems reasonable there. As far as win rate data is concerned, she gained just under 1%, because, I think this change is pretty small, as we saw by it dealing 1 to 3% more damage. And this change is really small because Tibbers' durability isn't that big, so a small change. She is certainly relatively strong as a mid laner, but nothing absurd. Bel'Veth gets a big set of changes, trying to lower her MMR skew. So basic attack range is being increased at all points in time. That's being compensated later by the ultimate. Stay tuned for that. Base health regen down, health regen growth is down. It's actually somewhat nerfs her laning quite a bit. Like if she's out on the map for a lot longer, she's going to, be sort of more worn down. This is actually a very fiddly change. I think this changes very, very little about the champion, but the amount of attack speed she gets per lavender stack is tweaking ever so slightly. Functionally, it's slightly higher early, slightly lower late. We'll talk about that math later on. Royal Maelstrom. It's actually been found out that Emax first is actually her best build, though still relatively uncommon. Emax does the most damage, and so the level incentive on Emax is going down. 2% lifesteal at max rank, and 4 damage on hit down at max rank. And then the R is going to deal much less explosion damage, again, at later ranks. Late game base numbers tend to be low MMR skewed. The bonus attack range, right, flattened by rank 1. And then actual early game buff to how much your builded minions have for like a, level 6, 7, 8 Rift Herald, summon their top lane, push down the lane. So let's talk about most of these numbers. Okay, so first up, here is her health per minute before and after, down fairly substantially. And if we assume she gets 4 stacks per level, 4 stacks of bonus stack speed per level, which like, I don't know, is 24 stacks at level 6 appropriate? I don't know exactly, but this feels roughly appropriate. I try to pick a relatively high number to make it like really apparent, and she doesn't feel it. Like maximally at 52 stacks of Death and Lavender, it's 2% more attack speed. So it's basically not better in the early game, but it's also not really worse until really, really late game, where if we have 4 stacks times 18, something like 72 stacks, that would be at 72 stacks of Death and Lavender at level 18, it's 9% less attack speed. If she has no bonus AS in her build anywhere else, which is probably entirely unrealistic, right? So I chose probably a very high number for 4 stacks of level, but to pick something high to like show the differences at too high a number, and there's really no difference for the vast majority of the game. So not a really, really huge difference there. Now, as far as her actual performance as Low is concerned, actually, we'll do one more thing. So, sorry, here is the E damage. I guess we're going to go max to E max back to E max second. And so here is the base damage of the E, not counting anything else going on. Well, sorry, it is counting the AD ratio, the total AD ratio. It is counting that. So this is before and hit effects though. And then here's the lifesteal before and after. Not gigantic, but we'll probably push her back to maxing it second. Now, as far as solo queue data is concerned for the average player, there are some very weird biases here because over the course of the previous patch, people got better at Bel'Veth, which means if you measured like day 14 of the patch, aka yesterday, and you measure day 1 of the patch today, you'll get a win rate drop from all the nerfs, / all the buffs. However, if you're measuring the entire patch, you're measuring day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, where players are bad at champion, the win rate curve keeps going up, then it drops from nerfs, but it's still above where it started on day 1, 2, 3. And so patch to patch win rate data is really, really unusable for a new champion. It is worth noting though, that for the average player right now in jungle for Bel'Veth, she is incredibly, incredibly, incredibly strong, nearing a 54% win rate for the average player in jungle. As a top laner, appears to still be unplayable, even though she does get stacks from large minions. We're really not there. It's not close. She's not a good top laner. Day over day, she gained 1% win rate in top lane. Day over day, she lost 0.5% win rate in jungle. She is still far too good for the average player in jungle. She's going to look really, really good. And then, yeah, Endless Banquet, the attack range thing. Basically, obviously, up here, she's actually, I guess, got more. This is the damage. So, obviously, no damage difference with, no ranks of the ability. Same damage at level 1, and then higher levels, lower damage. Here is her attack range before and after. Getting 50 bonus attack range at rank 1 of the ultimate is a pretty big deal, considering she got her base attack range buff 50 as well, but it's all 225 instead of scaling 225, so early game buff, same in the late game, early game equal, worse in the late game, but again, very, very strong champion, really, really, really strong for most players, keep at it. Next up, Rocket Grab gained 15 flat damage, and the ultimate gained 25 flat damage. Pretty small, pretty easy changes, nothing too spicy, but here you go, here's Rocket, here's all that damage. We'll go ahead and fix this typo real quick. And as far as solo queue winner is concerned, gained almost 1% win rate and is pretty playable for, I would say, most ranks. So, Blitzcrank, relatively balanced champion, he's fine. Cool. Next up, Dr. Mundo. It's not a very exciting change, right? Dr. Mundo has less health regen through his passive, but also gains less health gain from R. So this is his total health regen. Just from the passive before and after, I believe. No, sorry. This is the total health regen. Counting his innate base health regen and adding in his champion passive. He's losing 10 to 14% of his passive health regen. He will actually lose more the more max health he buys, since the nerf is all in here. They didn't nerf the base health regen change, so loses even more in actual practice. Then this is, assuming you could get your entire health bar as missing health, if you could somehow hit it perfectly, the increased base health goes from 10, 20 to 8 to 15 missing health. And here are the numbers here of how much health maximally he would have before and after the changes. Now, the healthier Mundo is in pressing R, the less he's going to feel this nerf, but a pretty meaningful regen nerf and a pretty delicate nerf to everything else. Overall, though, this ended up being a pretty big change. For Dr. Mundo in the top lane, he seemed to lose about 2.5% win rate. He is still relatively strong for most players. He is still a good champion. He is still totally playable. He's still totally pickable. But he's no longer like the best top laner in the game. As far as jungle, he was sadly nerfed. I mean, a little bit below the average champion. He's fine. He's like a 49% win rate jungler for the average player. If you have a good comp for Mundo, or you like playing Mundo, you're good at Mundo, it's still fine. He's just no longer, highly sought after, which seems pretty reasonable. Next up is Fiora. Pretty simple change. The bonus AD ratio on the max health damage on the passive is going down. Pretty simple stuff here. Here is the table before and after. Obviously, the more AD that she buys, the more you feel the nerf. This ended up being over a 1% win rate nerf to Fiora. So for the average player, Fiora is balanced. I believe she might scale up with MMR. So she's probably still a strong pick in high elo, but definitely a meaningful nerf there. Then we have Heimerdinger, who's also getting a durability change to his turrets, his minions, and then also getting a little bit of flat damage, 1 to 5 flat damage on turret rank up. No AP ratio change, but the flat turret damage does indeed go up. Here's the numbers on his turret health. With an approximation for how much AP he normally buys, the AP ratio climbs from level 9 onwards. And then here is the basic turret auto attack damage, accounting for AP as well. Again, not really a gigantic change. And keep in mind that a lot of the damage from the turrets actually just comes from, 1, the AP ratio, and 2, the actual beam itself. The basic turret damage actually not that high overall, which is fine. Just wanted to point it out as true, as well as a 1-second cooldown buff to the Electron Storm Grenade. So all pretty meaningful things there. End of the day, the result is a probably substantial overbuff to Heimerdinger. Heimerdinger appears to be, though with very limited data, as he is an unpopular champion, he appears to be incredibly strong, possibly micro-patch worthy, very, very, very overpowered in mid lane and bot lane and maybe support. Jungle Heimer, I have almost no data on. I will try to find it, but there is practically none, and it appears to be horrible, but there are absolutely no games. So you really can't tell. There's actually no data. Heimer top seems okay. His best roles seem mid, bot, and support. Heimerdinger is probably the winner of the patch. Get on this before he gets micro patch. This champion is too good, I think. Next up is Ivern, who's getting a lower health cost and mana cost on the passive. He's getting 10 to 30 on the E shield, and he's getting some durability on Daisy, all of which should feel quite good. So let's look at it. Here's the health cost before and after. Here's the mana cost before and after. As a percentage, of course, it goes down quite a lot in the late game, but in terms of actually how much health you're losing, 20 health and mana by mid game, more like, 40 health and mana by late game, more like 80 health and mana. Pretty good. Again, E shield up 10 to 30. Tends to be maxed first, as far as I can tell. And then here's the overall durability on Daisy, accounting for the new armor and MR. About 10% more durable here. Again, not getting as much as the champions themselves got in the durability update. Some result here is that Ivern is still an overall weak jungler from limited data. He is an overall weak jungler, though I believe Ivern scales up with MMR. So overall weak for the average player, but probably pretty decent at higher MMRs. Ivern mid is back to being viable. Now, it's always been pretty unpopular, but as an enchanter mid, Ivern's actually pretty solid here. Obviously, really, really good gank assist. You can E flash to set up a slow into the root, and your jungler gets the gank. Even if all you do is Q a minion to get the Singe out into melee range to then jump onto the champion, that can be okay as well. Obviously, easy blue buffs, hand them off, no big deal. Actually, a pretty good mid laner. If you like enchanter mids, Ivern mid is a good mid laner, but overall was pretty big loser in the durability update, and as far as I can tell, still an overall weak jungler and weak support for most players. players. Speaking of not weak for most players, though, is Janna, who has been just incredibly strong after the update. And so the rank up on W is going down, a flat 4% off the slow, and a rank up on the bonus move speed off of Zephyr, both getting hit here. So here's the new stuff on Janna. Here's the speed, here's the slow. We can get rid of some of the decimals and the percentages here, sure. But ultimately, yeah, less slow. We can actually make this red because that was actually the correct numbers here. But the potency of the slow is down by about 10%, and the move speed that she gains is also down a fair bit as well, which are pretty small ultimately. But and then, oh, sorry, there's also actually a much more meaningful change, which is a 10 AP and a 5% AP ratio off of Eye of the Storm. So here is this with an AP accounted for as well. Pretty solid 13 to 7% off the shielding there. Now that ends up resulting in about a 2% win rate nerf to Janna. She is still overall strong for the average player. Janna definitely a strong support, a good support, but no longer the one you're going to pick for freelo. But if you like playing Janna, you'll be rewarded. She's a good pick. Enchantress tend to be above 50% win rate. Janna is no exception. We have a buff to Jarvan, a bunch of mana growth, which is, pretty reasonable. And then also Martial Cadence gets down to a very, very short cooldown by endgame, which is pretty interesting. So we can talk about what's going on there with him. Mana, I don't think tends to matter for junglers very much. I think it matters a lot more for laners who actually use their mana bar to wave clear and things like that. So I think mid and top Jarvan, the rare bot Jarvan definitely gets better, but I think jungle Jarvan will tend not to feel this very much because you're not usually staying out in lane that much. And sometimes you're even working a blue buff, even if you are. Passive cooldown, of course, knocking out the jungle clear for a while. In a world where you do, fight a blue buff or a red buff for exactly 5.5 seconds, and you get a second passive off, this will increase your cure speed here. But I think from this point onwards, your base damage from Gore Drinker and Death Dance is so high that you don't really care about an extra passive tick anyway, and will really, really not affect that very much. Of course, in a team fight, you can do more damage. It certainly can be relevant. But again, I think this means for top Jarvan, who levels up more quickly than support Jarvan, and jungle Jarvan, and reaches these endgame situations more. Now, the end result, as far as the solo queue data is concerned, is a very mediocre 0.5% win rate for jungle Jarvan. Now, that said, there is not that much sample, but we're pretty sure at this point that it's an under 1% win rate bump. However, for top Jarvan, it's maybe around 3%. Now, again, variance top Jarvan is not that popular. There's not that much data out there. Grain of salt on the 3% line, but it brings top lane Jarvan to a somewhat reasonable spot. Now, both I think are on average weak. Both appear to be on average weak champions in the durability update. They're not doing too great. Maybe you can find a better build for him and gain some win rate. Maybe there's a better rune out there to gain some win rate. But overall, Jarvan is not doing exceptionally in the durability update. He's around a 47-48% win rate champion in jungle and top. Probably not the best option for everybody. And now we have Katarina. So Katarina got a bunch of changes. So AD ratio down on the passive, AD ratio down on Shumpo, but base damage up to compensate because it's a total AD ratio. And then some really funky stuff to Death Lotus that I didn't bother to math because it was way too much for me because the breakpoints are way too finicky to know what I wanted. So we have some math. This is Katarina's R damage. Passive damage with an AD build. I didn't include R damage. We're just going to, do that. So the passive damage goes down by about 3 to 7% if you're building things like Divine Thunderer, Ruin King, Death Dance, like things that have raw AD on them, and you're kind of stacking up AD, you lose a bunch of damage. The E damage, if you build no AD, is down by 2 to 5%. If you do build AD, is down 4 to 10%. So far, we have definitive nerfs to Katarina. Obviously, none of this is a compensation buff, not a compensation buff. Death Lotus could be a change. Keep in mind, though, the on-hit effectiveness actually has gone up by 3%. Physical damage per dagger is actually increasing with attack speed. So, what does that mean? So the overall Katarina win rate, there is no data on. Lolix does not have anything on Katarina, so I couldn't really tell you. Let's see. I'm going to do a very quick investigation into Katarina on this patch to see where things landed up. She appears to be a 46% win rate champion on the patch. The day before, or the week before, she was a 48%. So she appears to have lost about 2% win rate. However, is this because of bad build choices? Well, Nashor's Tooth is now a solid 1.5% win rate above Divine Thunderer. Rocket Belt is also a solid 1% win rate above Divine Thunderer. So Divine Thunderer, Katarina, does not appear to be the correct build in 12.12. And you compare to 12.11. Divine Sunderer was the more common build and the same win rate. So Nashor's Tooth Cat lost maybe 0.4% win rate. Of course, variance exists here. There's only so many games. Divine Sunderer Cat lost 1.9% win rate. So Nashor's Tooth AP Cat did not really change. Divine Sunderer Cat went down very substantially. Obviously a fairly big change list, but the AP build landed quite flat, and the Bruiser build went down. So I know I saw a complaint in a Reddit comment about how they're putting power into the least interesting part of Katarina. I mean, realistically, they're just making AD Katarina worse. And honestly, a really well done change list to keep AP Cat in the same spot and nerf AD Cat by a meaningful amount. So I think well done. Next up, we're going to have a look at Lucian, who lost 2 base AD and lost 0 to 20 off the rank of a Piercing Light. So here's his base AD before and after. Here's Q damage before and after. Pretty simple data table here. The end result for Lucian is losing about 1% win rate. I believe he is high MMR skewed, but he's about 4 to 9% win rate for the average player in solo queue. Seraphine getting a pretty big set of updates here. Beat Drop was optimally maxed last. As a support, you were supposed to max Q and then W, and then of course E just slows and stuns for longer, which is obviously a strict buff there as well. Seraphine gained about 3% win rate everywhere. She appears to have gained the most win rate in bottom lane. Now, bot lane Seraphine, I think, is going to be maybe a bit of a sample size problem. Bot lane Seraphine only has 5,000 games on the patch, so our variance is well above 1% here. But there's a real good shot that Seraphine bot is back to being gigabusted. This change list didn't even appear to affect support Seraphine more than other roles of Seraphine. She was already a good mid laner and a good bot laner. She is now an incredibly overpowered bot laner, an incredibly overpowered mid laner, and a very good support. So Heimerdinger is a big winner, and Seraphine is a big winner. Both those champions are really absurd. If you want some free low, those are the champs. Shaco is getting an update to try to push him off of a bruiser build and more into an assassin. Sadly, I do not have Shaco data on Lawlytics easily. I can do manual looks here, but let's talk about what actually changed here. So 4 health growth off and 0.7 armor growth off. That means Shaco, oh, right, so here's the Seraphine E cooldown change. Nothing too surprising. Okay, so here is Shaco's health before and after, down 3%. This is also a proxy for his magic durability. And then here is his armor before and after, used with alongside his health. Here's his physical durability before and after, down pretty substantially, up to 8%. This definitely matters. He is definitely squishier. Here's the bonus damage on Deceive, assuming you were maxing it last. This is if you were at an AD build. Here's how much bonus damage it deals. Otherwise, there's not really much of a change because the base damage went nowhere on Deceive. Just the AD ratio went up, and Fiora went up substantially. So an AD ratio is going to get another 25% damage out of the button press of Deceive, which is pretty meaningful. Jack of the Boxes have the same base damage, but the AP ratio went up meaningfully as well, which means we're looking at this on an AP build. Also note, we have a very aggressive AP ratio of 250 to double on Jack of the Boxes, which is very strong, which should push you toward AP Shaco. We also have a buff to 2 Shiv Poison. The base damage is still 70 to 170. Bonus AD ratio went up by 0.5, or 0.05, and the AP ratio went up by 0.1, which is a substantially larger buff. So 2 Shiv Poison on an AD build gains 1 to 3% more damage, and 2 Shiv Poison on an AP build gains 3 to 10% more damage on a reasonable approximation of a build. What that means is Shaco on the patch for 12.12 is actually still not outstanding. He's not really standing above everyone else, at least in the jungle. Our data set is 36,000 games, so actually a pretty good number of games. Obviously, some build AD, some build AP. His most popular first item is Duskblade. However, Duskblade is 4% win rate below Liandry's Anguish. AP Shaco appears to be a relatively fair champion. 51% win rate on one item. If you can go into Demonic or Cosmic Drive, it climbs and climbs from there. So, he is doing very well on AP builds. His assassin builds do not appear to be too strong. Limited data, of course. It appears Essence Reaver is better than Duskblade on him. We shall see. But that's what it appears to be looking like. AP Shaco appears to be the best looking. Next up is Singed, who had really picked up as a mid laner. People had discovered, like, as of the last patch, he was almost equal pick rate in mid and top. Players had fully discovered that Predator mid Singed was really, 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 really busted. Top Singed also quite good, by the way, but really, really, really busted. So a lot of nerfs came into Singed. Now, Mega Adhesive is getting a lower a lower slow early game and a lower bonus stat on a Sanity Potion early game. What that means is the slow is going to be worse until level 15, and the ult's going to be worse until level 11. Even though there's a buff at 17 and a buff at 16, this is definitely an overall nerf for the champion. There's no way to argue around it. This is definitely a nerf to Singed. That's okay. He was doing exceptionally well in top lane and absurdly well in the mid lane. Now, of course, we'll talk about it later on in this patch rundown, there were nerfs to Predator. Now, Singed, of course, is an unpopular champion, so our data is going to be somewhat limited, but it's worth noting that for top lane Singed, he appears to be fine with a solid Keystone. He appears to be solid with Conqueror. So he appears to be okay. Got nerfed down to 4 to 9 and change win rate. For mid lane Singed, he got nerfed more. He was more reliant on Predator. Got nerfed to 51 and change % win rate. Now, of course, again, unpopular champion. People are getting off of mid. Our data sample for mid lane is 6,000 games. It's not a lot. But Predator Singed still appears to be a 51% win rate Keystone choice. And there's not enough data to look at other options. So we don't know if he should really hop off Predator. But Predator mid Singed is still an overall, as far as we can tell from early data, an overall strong champion. Support win rate dropped even less, only dropped 1.5% win rate because I think it just needs the rest of that power less, or just overall too few games, high variance, who knows. But TLDR, Predator mid Singed still strong, not broken. Top Singed, still viable. All right, let's go to the next one, which is going to be Soraka. Soraka is getting a pretty big 25 to 75 bump on Wish. However, it no longer removes Grievous Wounds when casted, which I would guess to be a nerf to the champion. Here is the base heal, but here is the heal against 40% Grievous. Worth noting that at any amount of Grievous Wounds, Wish is worse, right? None of these numbers are 25%. Definitely worse against small Grievous, a lot worse against big Grievous. Soraka does not appear to have any information here on Lolit's front page, so we're going to have to investigate it manually. Soraka, after the patch, 51.25% win rate. Before the patch, wrong button. Before the patch, 51.15% win rate. So really more of a follow-up, basically a power neutral change to Soraka, which doesn't surprise me. If Grievous is on, it's worse. If Grievous is off, it's better. That's going to be sometimes one, sometimes the other. Soraka is as powerful as before, which is overall pretty powerful, which seems fine, seems reasonable. That's where she is. Next up, nerfs to Viego. So the heal is down. The target max health heal is down from 2.5 to 2%. That is a 20% nerf to the healing. You can no longer stealth while charging W. W into E, instantly stealth, was a pretty busted sort of play you could do. This is actually a pretty big deal for pro play, so you can't hide your throw. That's a really, really, really big deal. Good choice there. And then worse damage and scaling on Heartbreaker. Now keep in mind the AD ratio didn't change, but the base damage went down 3 to 5%, which I think is meaningful because it means he's going to push more toward AD builds. Now, this ended up being about a 0.5% win rate nerf to Viego, not a very big one. Now, one of the things is, though, that in pro play, people are doing a lot of, tank builds on him. If we look at his solo queue build data, first item Divine Sunderer is still a solid 2% win rate below his other options. Kraken Slayer, Shield Bow, Ruin King, even Trinity Force are very exceptional. And interestingly, from early data, Dead Man's Plate, though, still looks very, very good as item 2. So may still be doing 1 damage item into tank items. Yeah, really not gutted. They are pretty small changes to his damage overall, so that's where we are. It does seem like doing Dead Man's Plate and such feels pretty solid on him. Next up is Yorick. So Yorick is getting a durability update to his ghouls. They're also going to run a little bit faster, and a durability update to his ulti. Overall, pretty small stuff. Overall, not a very popular champion either, so data will be limited. We can look into it a little bit here. First off, oh yeah, here's the Viego R damage. Sorry for missing that one. But down about 18%. The missing health damage is down 18%. Yorick Ghoul HP is up 20 to 30%. Maiden health up about 10%. Not a huge difference here. On the patch, his win rate is about 53%. On the patch before, his win rate was 51. So actually, the substantial durability update to his ghouls goes from 51.08 to 53 flat almost. This, surprisingly, appears to be a 2% win rate buff to Yorick. This appears to be very, very, very strong. This seems very meaningful. I assume the ghouls catching up to enemy champions, not being killed by AoE damage nearly as often. Yes, I think they still get killed by auto attacks, but this appears to be a very, very big deal. And, sorry, the other big thing, this is actually a very big deal as well. The maiden chase range has been dropped from 1600 to 1000 range, which is a very big AI update to getting the maiden off her target so she doesn't tower dive and die quite as heavily. So yeah, with a solid 20,000 game sample on the current patch, it appears to be a 2% win rate bump. Pretty meaningful. We're not in micropatch territory, but Yorick appears to be very strong for the average player and really worth considering. And then we have Yuumi as our penultimate champion change, a 4 to 20 bump on the shield, a 0 to 40 nerf on the heal, and a 5% move speed bump here. All pretty big changes. The end result is a Yuumi who, once again, is not tracked on the front page, so I have to manually investigate from Lawlytics. On 12.12, the win rate is 49.5. On 12.11, the win rate was 50.2. So lost about 0.7% win rate. There is a chance there is a skill order issue here, and she should be building a little bit differently. If we investigate, Emax is still seemingly the best build, although it's closer. Emax or Qmax. And if your Emax, W or Q second are both seemingly reasonable. So you can kind of go either way. I think you have a bit more room to make decisions here. But yeah, Yuumi, kind of in a similar spot. We can look at the data table here. Here's Yuumi's passive shield, up about 6%. Here is her healing, down pretty substantially by late game. And then here's the move speed, up pretty nicely. Solid stuff. Again, roughly power neutral, not too much. Then we have Zeri. Zeri is gaining some health regen. And Ultra Shock Laser is losing a bunch on its AD ratio from 1.5 to 1.3, as the burst through walls were a bit too good. So we can look at some data and see what went on here. Well, first off, here's the regen before and after. This is regen per minute. Her base regen, by the way, is very, very, very low. But they got the scaling regen to give her some actual regen by late game. W damage is down pretty meaningfully. Keep in mind that this is 1.75x the numbers if you get it through a wall. But yeah, right. A pretty reasonable damage drop on the W. The end result ends up being about a 1% win rate drop to Zeri. She goes from being a balanced champion for the average player to a little bit weak for the average player, but I think, if you're good at Zeri, go have fun. And then we have little minor updates. Night Harvester now has a better build path, as instead of Blasting Wand, we get Fiendish Codex. Fiendish Codex is one of the best component items in the game, so that is a buff to Night Harvester. Serpent's Fang no longer accidentally scales with heal and shield power. Interesting bug, but doesn't do that anymore. Shadowflame. The additional damage based on ignored MR no longer mitigated by target's MR. So, by the way, this is a direct buff to Shadowflame. The way Shadowflame is coded, it doesn't actually give you Magic Pen. It just does the math before dealing damage and say, if they had 20 less magic resist, I should do this much damage. And then it was dealing that as magic damage, which then got mitigated by MR. So Shadowflame, which by the way was already an outstanding item, is even better. So Shadowflame is going to look very, very, very good. You should buy it on a lot of champions. This item is great. And then the one thing that finally matters here at the very end is Predator. This is a very big deal. Predator is getting hit quite hard. Let's talk about it. Okay, so the move speed is going from 45 flat to a scaling move speed that doesn't start kicking on until level 8. Like, it starts 25 at level 1, sure, but doesn't improve above 25 until level 8. So all the early boot skanks, like if you're a Predator jungler and you recalled first for like amp tone boots, Predator's worse. If you're mid-singe, you start boots, Predator's worse. The damage, a much more neutral change. The AP ratio went up, the AD ratio went up. The base damage actually breaks even pretty quickly. This one does scale 1 to 18. So this is actually going to be a buff for a large portion of the game. The cooldown, though, starts worse and only ends the same as 60, so a substantially longer cooldown. So here's Predator's move speed. It got hit really hard. It got hit with a truck who slammed the brakes. Predator slammed the brakes here. Amount of move speed gained by Predator, definitely down by a ton. Predator's damage up pretty early on. If you're doing like a first item recall here, like on a jungler, the damage output gonna be right as good or better for a large portion of the game. This is using an approximation for AP built on a champion, like say a Diana. If you're gonna play like Predator Diana or like Predator AP Galio, this is a pretty solid approximation of how much damage it's actually dealing. Buffed for most of the game, but again, the cooldown is worse for literally all of it until level 18, which is rarely hit. So move speed definitely worse, cooldown definitely worse. Bit more damage does not a keystone make. Predator is definitely actually weaker. I don't think it's just simply a reshape. I think it's actually weaker as a rune. What you can do is kind of, look at these numbers and say, I do 4% more damage, but it's a 20% longer cooldown. I'm doing less damage per second. So until level, I guess to be fair, at level 8 and onwards, well, actually level 9 and onwards, your damage amp is higher than your cooldown amp, so technically the DPS of the rune is up from level 9s onward. But you still get less target access, which is the other part of the rune. So I'm pretty confident this is a nerf overall to Predator as a rune. Goodbye, I'm sorry, Predator. Oh yeah, and junk monsters are now visible instantly when dashing and blinking in invisible range. Kindred, this is a direct buff to Kindred. I am curious if Kindred actually gains win rate here. I wouldn't be surprised. So 49.45 on the patch. 48.6 pre-patch. Now, data, of course, is limited, but if we trust the data at face value, instantly, this is a 0.8% win rate buff to Kindred just from this. Big change. Yep. Pretty big deal. Congratulations, Kindred players. Your champion is no longer getting destroyed for the entire history of her, her life. Okay, so that is the big version of the rundown. TLDR patch 12.12. Let's get it. Amumu gets some really substantial buffs here. Sorry, we're going to redo the TLDR in a second. Let's start over. League of Legends patch 12.12 rundown. The patch is live for all of us. And because of that, I have data from Lolalytics. TLDR, let's go through it really quickly. Amumu is buffed pretty substantially. Lower mana cost on Q and flat damage on R makes him a very, very good jungler for the average player and a very good support for the average player. These were really, really big support buffs. These were solid jungle buffs. He feels a lot for the vast majority of us humans who aren't masters and pro players. Amumu is a very good jungler and a very good support. He is back. Gain your MMR now. And he gets a very, very small buff. She's fine. She's playable. She's reasonably strong. But a small AP ratio buff to Q and a small durability buff to Tibbers is nice. She is reasonably playable. She's reasonably strong. Go for it if you want to. Bel'Veth gains a bunch of attack range at all times. Loses some health regen. Gets a basically non-change to her passive. Ignore this line entirely. Emax was optimal. It is less optimal now. And Endless Banquet does a bit less damage late game. The bonus attack range doesn't need to rank up anymore. You just get 225 range at all times during the ultimate. And a bit less health early game on the minions. Ultimately, what this means is she's still very, very strong. I'm assuming she is still low MMR skewed. She is still an overall strong jungler for most players. She is very, very good. Keep playing her. She's outstanding. Blitzcrank gains a small buff here. Nothing massive, nothing gigantic. Is a bit stronger of a champion. Not a big deal, though. 15 damage in Rocket Grab. 25 damage in the ultimate. Relatively playable champion, nothing special, he's fine. Dr. Mundo gets a very heavy nerf, a lot less regen overall via his passive. This also adds to his base health regen. It's like a 10 to 15% health regen nerf overall. Pretty substantial, like 5%. I mean, less you can see, right? 2 to 5% on maximum dosage, max health gain. Still ends up being a pretty big deal. He is still an overall strong top laner, but not a busted top laner. He is sadly probably a bit weak as a jungler. But playable if you like him, certainly. He's relatively playable in the jungle. Still a strong top laner, just not super busted. Fiora, a reasonably small nerf here. Not OP for most humans at home anymore for Fiora. A reasonable champion, sure, if you like her, go for it. If you want to counterpick some big champions, go for it. But pretty meaningful nerf to actually lower her bonus AD ratio on the passive true damage. This actually matters quite a bit. Heimerdinger is probably the single biggest winner of the patch. Heimerdinger is probably micro-patch worthy. This champion is absurd in bot lane, in mid lane, maybe in support, a solid top laner. This champ is pretty much some freelo. Turrets are substantially more durable. The basic turret shot damage is up around like 10% in actual practice. 1 second off the storm grenade cooldown. All really big things. All really meaningful. Heimerdinger is a much stronger champion. Get your wins while you can. He is great. Next up is Ivern, who did not do well over the last couple of weeks. Pretty decent buff to how much health he has to pay and mana has to pay to take camps. Pretty decent buff to his shield, 10 to 30 up. Decent buff to Daisy's durability. This all amounts to a 2.5% win rate bump, which is really good. But still, for the average player at home, he is a relatively weak jungler. However, he is a very strong enchanter mid. Maybe the best enchanter mid of the game. Stay tuned. He's number 2. But still a pretty good enchanter mid if you want to play an enchanter in the mid lane. Janna loses some win rate. Was one of the very best champions in the durability update. Shields did not get nerfed by very much, but are still very good. And so she gets some bonus move speed off of the Zephyr rank up. She gets 4% flat off the slow on W. And she loses 10 shielding off of Eye of the Storm, as well as a small AP ratio nerf there as well. Ultimately results in a 2% win rate nerf to Janna. She is still a strong champion. She's totally worth playing, but no longer the best support in the game, which I think is pretty reasonable. Jarvan gets a bunch of mana growth and lower cooldown, late game on martial cadence. This ends up being a very large top lane focused buff. Now, he's not a great top laner still, but he's much closer to playable. It's a very small buff to jungle Jarvan, ultimately. He is okay-ish, a bit weak in both roles. Nothing too extreme. Katarina gets a bunch of changes. AD ratio nerf for the conversation base damage change, and an on-hit effectiveness buff with an attack speed buff. What this means is the goal was to make like Ruined King attack speed builds keep up, and Nashor's Tooth builds keep up, but nerf Divine Sunderer, Death's Dance tank build kinds of things. The end result is that Nashor's Tooth lost, you can round to a 0% win rate as a first item build, and Divine Sunderer lost 2% win rate as a first item build. So Bruiser Katarina got heavily nerfed, and AP Katarina did not get changed. As funky as the change list looks, it hit exactly on point, and the designer deserves kudos. Next time I see him, I'm going to be like, yo, that was a really well done balance change, because hit exactly the goals, and that's really well done. Lucian loses 2 base AD and 0 to 20 damage off of Piercing Light. Definitely matters quite a bit. It's about a 1% win rate nerf to the champion. For the average player, 49% win rate champion. But so someone's in chat, because I'm recording this live on Twitch. Kudos on 43% win rate Katarina D2+. You don't know how to you don't know how math works. You don't know how data works. That's okay. We're gonna move on. Seraphine. Seraphine gained a lot from this update here. So E was already debatably the correct ability to max last. That Q into W was the better build. Q max first is kind of needed for wave clear. W max, obviously a potential option here for support to max that one to get better shielding on the teammates, because W now has a rank up on that result. And so E is now becoming a 1-point wonder, with the cooldown incentive going away entirely. This ends up being a really large buff of 3% win rate to support Seraphine, to mid Seraphine, and to bot Seraphine. Mid and bot Seraphine were already her best roles. She is really, really strong. I said that Heimerdinger was the biggest winner of the patch. I believe that's still true. Seraphine is the second biggest winner of the patch. She is absurdly good in mid lane and in bot lane. She is extremely strong. She is very, very good. Absolutely great champion. Gonna do really, really, really well. Maybe micropatchable as well. Truly outstanding champion. Obviously, the extra stun duration really matters here as well. But yeah, Seraphine mid and Seraphine bot are pretty much free low. All right. Next up, we have Shaco, who's getting some tweaks overall. The goal was to remove bruiser builds. Right? If you remember the old days of like tank Echo, tank Fizz, they don't want tank Shaco, right? These hyper evasive, incredibly mobile champions, and they don't want bruiser builds to be optimal on them. They want them to be damage champions. And so the less durable you are, the idea is you have less health and less armor. The value of getting more health and armor is lower in a like, I can actually tank you, and say, no, you're going to rely on evasiveness, you're going to rely on base damage, and you can't make it up in item buys. That's the goal here. So lower health, lower armor, we'll talk about those numbers in a little bit, ends up being about like I think it's like a 5% like durability nerf at the end of it all. But Deceive has a massively increased AD ratio of 0.15. Jack in the Box has a massively increased ratio of 3%, which is a very big deal with how small the damage numbers are. And 2-Shift Poison gets a 5% bonus AD and 10% bonus AD ratio, or AP ratio buff. The end result is that there is a 3% win rate delta of Liandry's being better than Duskblade. However, Essence Reaver is more like here, but AP Shaco appears to be definitively the best Shaco by far. I did not investigate if it was Duskblade into tank or Duskblade into more damage, or Essence Reaver into tank or Essence Reaver into more damage. There could be some biases there, but full AP Shaco appears to be very good. Full AP Shaco looks really, really good. Essence Reaver looks okay, but it appears that AP Shaco got more overall and looks to be in a very good spot. Next up is Singed. So Singed definitely got nerfed pretty substantially. There were also Predator nerfs later on in the patch. Those matter a lot as well. So Mega Adhesive, you don't rank it beyond rank 1 until level 14. So until level like 17, you don't have more slowing. And Insanity Potion, of course, weaker or equal. And then level 16, you finally have more stats. So Singed definitively nerfed from these two changes. Also, his Predator builds were nerfed as well because Predator got nerfed. So what it comes down to is, how is he overall as a champion? Well, as a top laner, he's fine. Early data suggests that Conqueror Singed is totally playable, relatively high win rate, completely balanced champion. Great to play, go for it. Mid Singed lost a lot because Mid Singed was all about abusing Predator and just roaming to bot lane and killing people. That obviously went down in power level quite a bit because there were nerfs to Predator in this patch. Mid Singed Predator is actually still strong. It is still a like 51% winner champion, actually overall still strong, pretty solid champ, but that's kind of the look here, that Singed is reasonably strong with the right builds, but no longer incredibly overbearing as the mid Predator roamer. Next up, we have Soraka, who gained 25 to 75 base heal on Wish, but it no longer removes grievous wounds. This ends up being really, really close to power neutral, as we're getting a like 10 to like 20% bump on Wish, which is then cut back by 0 or 25 or 40% based on grievous wounds that now actually affects the spell. So overall power level, roughly neutral. I am glad to see this change back in, that Grievous affects the skill, now that Grievous is in a sort of more reasonable spot of like a mild acquisition. I like these changes. I think design-wise, they're good changes. Soraka is overall a relatively strong champion. She's around the same level as someone like Janna, as like a pretty solid, pretty good support. Play him if you want. Obviously, Seraphine's way up in the clouds. Viego gets actually a pretty small nerf. This ends up being under 1% win rate. Less healing on the passive. You can no longer use the EW combo to stealth while charging to get into a lane. This is probably more of a high elo nerf that you're not going to see when measuring the player base at large very much. And then also lower flat damage, like non-scaling damage on Heartbreaker as well. Of course, still pretty solid damage skill overall. Still has, of course, a decent AD ratio. But keep in mind that, like, you know, at 200 bonus AD, we get plus 6%. Like, there's not a lot of heavy lifting done by the AD ratio, right? It's barely moving. So it's still largely skill level based. Anyway, does it matter? Yeah, a little bit, right? The base damage is down by a solid just straight up 20%, not counting bonus AD. Ends up being a pretty small change overall. For the average player, though, Viego is a 49% win rate champion, at least on the builds they're doing. We'll see if there's build innovations that still give him like really good locations, but it is still true that Divine Sunderer is not his correct first item. Pros are still going Divine Sunderer first item. I still think they're wrong to do so, but Trinity Force builds, Shield Bow builds, Kraken Slayer builds, Ruin King builds, all 4 of them are doing better than Divine Sunderer. So if you are heartbroken by the nerfs to Viego, just build crit items and you'll feel pretty good about it. Yorick seems to have gained a lot, so a pretty meaningful bump to the durability and move speed of his ghouls, as well as a decent durability bump to the Maiden, as well as 1600 to 1000. The Maiden will come back sooner. Don't have to run nearly as far away to leash her back. The sum total of these changes is about a 2% win rate buff to Yorick. This is a very, very big deal. This is a lot. He's around, I think, a 53% win rate top laner for the average player. Yorick is definitely a solid playable option. Looks really, really good. So if you like Yorick at all, he's really good. Go play him this patch. More durable ghouls, faster ghouls, more durable Maiden, better Terror Maiden. That all adds up to a 2% win rate bump. Okay. Yuumi gets a very, very small, like 7% increase in her shield power, a nerf to Zumi's heal by 0 to 40, but a buff to the move speed by a flat 5%. This moves E off of the obvious max first, or at least max second. Probably still not going to leave it for last, but you are not hard guaranteed to max E first anymore. Overall still ends up being, I believe, a little bit powered down, but not by a large amount. I think she's around a 49% win rate support. Nothing too scary, nothing too absurd, but does appear to be down a little bit. Zeri gets some bonus health regen, but loses quite a lot of damage on Ultra Shock Laser. Because it is a total AD ratio nerf, there's a compensation in the base damage of a flat 10, but this is overall a nerf to the ability by a pretty meaningful amount. Zeri ends up losing about 1% win rate and is a bit below 50% for the average player at home. Overall, though, if you're good at Zeri, you'll still be rewarded for playing Zeri. We'll see if she still stays in pro play or not, but yeah, the nerf to Ultra Shock Laser, probably really worth doing considering how much damage this thing deals through walls, so a solid nerf there. A couple of other minor changes. Night Harvester now builds from a Fiendish Codex instead of a Blasting Wand. That is a really good build path change. It's the best AP component in the game, I think, Fiendish Codex, so that's going to feel really, really good. Serpent's Fang no longer amplified based on heal and shield power, so a very slight buff to supports overall and a very slight nerf to Serpent's Fang. Shadowflame has now been strictly buffed because it used to give you bonus damage based on its approximation of what Magic Pen would give you, but then that bonus damage would be reduced by MR. Whoops. Now it is not reduced by the target's MR. It is correctly amplified, and that's going to feel really good. So Shadowflame is gonna look really good in the new patch. It's not a huge buff by any means, but is a buff. Shadowflame is already very performant. Probably should see more Shadowflames. Predator got hit with a truck. The bonus move speed does not get better until like level 15. The damage breaks even by around level 6. However, with the cooldown being nerfed at every level until level 18, this is a substantial nerf to Predator. It appears with limited data that on something like mid-Singe, Predator is still the best keystone. Galio I didn't look at. There might be some other options out there, but Predator did get hit really, really strongly. Farther on down the line, when we have more data, we can investigate Predator as an overall performant keystone. But right now, champions like Diana or Amumu jungle or Poppy jungle or Galio mid or Singed mid, there isn't enough data on Predator and other keystones to make fair comparisons, so you can't measure easily exactly how ruined the rune is. Again, it does appear that Predator is still optimal on mid-Singe. There are still some Predator users out there, but it's clearly a lot weaker. And then one final change is jungle monsters finally show up instantly when you dash or blink over a wall. This single-handedly raised Kindred's win rate by 0.7%. It's the one that I spot checked. It's a pretty big deal. It's a pretty good look. It's pretty strong. So yeah, good change. As an occasional Kindred player, I am a very big fan of this change. This is great. A wonderful change overall. Good patch. I think there's a lot of fun stuff. Once again, Seraphine, Heimerdinger, Amumu, Yorick, all very, very, very big winners on this patch. All of which look really, really, really good. There's a lot of MMR to be gained in those roles. It's going to look pretty happy. All right. Thank you all very much. That's it for the video. See you next time. Bye.